The 124 Spider revives a classic name from Fiat's back catalogue and adds some Italian glamour to the affordable roadster segment of the sports car market. This car shares much with its closest Japanese rival, but a lively 1.4-litre turbocharged engine delivers a unique feel that provides this model with much of its special character.
Let me tell you a strange story about a Fiat that was originally going to be an Alfa Romeo, but which was, and now is, primarily a Mazda. Welcome to the Fiat 124 Spider. You're going to need some explanation, but to understand it, it's necessary to appreciate a bit of back history. So let's start with this. Affordable open-top sports car motoring really has three main eras. There's the British one of the 50s and 60s with cars like MGs and Triumph TRs. Then there's a modern one, popularised by today's iconic Mazda MX-5. In between, though, there was a period from the late 60s to the early 80s when, for many people, a car of this sort simply had to be Italian. It simply had to be an Alfa Spider or a Fiat 124 Spider. Today, the Fiat conglomerate wants to reclaim a slice of that history, primarily because it's trying to re-establish itself in the USA, the market in which 75% of those old roadsters were sold. The problem is, though, that sports cars are a niche segment, making it difficult to justify the huge investment required to produce something as good or better than the market-leading MX-5. But why bother? Why not persuade Mazda to donate MX-5 underpinnings to a new product that could be given an Italian look and feel? Well, that sounded like a good idea, and it was one initially pursued with a view to creating a new generation Alfa Spider, until it became clear that the model in question would have to be fundamentally built in Japan, which was a problem, given that the Fiat board had just decreed that all future Alfas were to be built in Italy. Cue a quick change of plan and a decision instead to pursue the same approach but use it to revive the Fiat 124 Spider model line. Since the original 124 sports car, the Turin brand hasn't offered a proper rear-driven sports car, its only modern-era effort in this regard having been the front-driven Punto-based Barchetta model launched in 1995. If Fiat was going to a proper rear-driven format and launch a new era 124 Spider, it soon became clear that the production process would be complicated. Company policy insisted on the new car using a Fiat engine, the 1.4-litre MultiAir turbo motor used in the Alfa Giulietta and the Fiat 500 Abarth. The deal with Mazda, though, required the new car to roll along the same Hiroshima production line as an MX-5. As a result, the Italian maker has to ship that MultiAir power plant to Japan, where it gets fitted in the 124, and if the car's going to be sold in Europe, turned round and sent straight back again. So is that effort really worthwhile? And is the car created a credibly different thing from the Japanese model it's based on? All good questions. Let's try and answer them. A lot's been said and written, some of it by us, about how modern, back-to-basics, affordable sports roadsters rekindle the spirit of 60s sports cars. On reflection, we're not entirely sure this is accurate. Something like a TR4 or an MG Midget was never designed to be driven on its door handles in the way that something like a modern Mazda MX-5 can be. An old-style roadster was bought for a quick, pleasurable Sunday afternoon blast to the pub. You didn't expect it to be able to undertake a stage of the Targa Florio. Now, we mention that here because referencing this shift in perspective is helpful in encapsulating some of the differences between this 124 Spider and its MX-5 design stablemate. Now, if for you a car of this kind must always be straining at the leash, wasted if it's not revved to the full through each gear, then ownership of the Mazda will make you very happy. But not everyone drives like that, and the original 124 Spider certainly didn't. Either by accident or design, Fiat has contrived here to properly rekindle that spirit of the 60s, complete, unfortunately, with a rather unsettled low-speed ride that sees sharper bumps sending minor shudders through the body that occasionally are enough to make the bonnet wobble. Don't misunderstand us, this car is still everything you want it to be. Quick, fun, sporty. It's just that its perspective on life is a little different from that of its Japanese rival, primarily because of the heart transplant that's taken place beneath the bonnet. As part of the deal that saw Mazda making this car, Fiat couldn't do anything to alter the original 4th generation MX-5 fundamentals. So the 124 Spider shares that car's basic chassis structure, its rear-wheel drive layout, its double wishbone front suspension and its multi-link setup at the rear. What the Italians could do, though, was to change the engine up front, which is why, rather than using Mazda's peppy, normally aspirated 1.5 and 2 litre twin-cam motors, this car uses the 140 bhp 1.4 litre MultiAir turbo unit you'll find in various other less exotic Fiat Group models. Installing this heavier power plant unfortunately spoils the previously perfect 50-50 MX-5 weight distribution, but of more consequence is the change it brings to the character of the car. There's nothing wrong with the sound it makes. There's a convincing snarl under power, and you get the odd turbo chuff when accelerating hard, but gone is the desire you get in the Mazda to rev to the red line in each ratio. This turbo unit's greater torque, 240 newton meters compared to 200 newton meters in a 2 litre MX-5, makes that unnecessary, and virtually all the work's done by the time you crest 5,000 RPM. Interestingly, though, this very different engineering approach produces very similar performance figures. Rest to 62 miles an hour takes 7.5 seconds, despite 2 gear shifts being needed on the way, with a flat-out maximum of 134 miles an hour. Now, this is virtually identical to that showing of the 2 litre Mazda. If that's not fast enough, then you'll be pointed towards the much pricier Abarth version of this car, which gets an uprated 170 bhp version of the same 1.4 litre MultiAir motor, and that's good for the 60 sprint in 6.8 seconds on the way to 144 miles an hour. Now, we should mention that the Italians have done more than just transplant the engine. The springs, the dampers, the anti-roll bars and the steering calibration are all Fiat's own, each in its own way a change that, less significantly, further contributes to this car's shifting character. As I've already suggested, the ride's firmer, and so is the steering, an electric setup that's nicely weighted and as precise and accurate as it should be on a car of this kind. Well-placed pedals and a short, positive 6-speed gear shift also add to the experience, although there is a 6-speed paddle shift automatic option if you can't be bothered with all that cog swapping. Please ignore that option, though, if you possibly can. All of this is perfectly suited for bowling along at a rapid yet sensible pace, enjoying the sun and zipping through the bends with the merest flick of the chunky 3-spoke wheel. Ever seen the opening sequence of the original version of The Italian Job? Well, that's what it's like when it's just you, a challenging road, a cloudless sky and a 124 Spider. Only if you want something more than that, and you'd already driven a new MX-5, might this car begin to disappoint. Overall, its responses are softer and a mite less direct, plus there is a touch more body roll and a trace of turbo lag below 3,000 RPM, which isn't ideal. Nor does it help that this mainstream variant lacks the limited slip differential that you get as standard in the 2 litre version of that Mazda. For that, you have to stretch to the pricey Abarth version. Now, Fiat should at least have made this feature optional on the 140 bhp models, because it makes a huge difference in the way you can get the power down at speed out of tighter bends. Other significant features restricted to Abarth buyers include a drive mode selector with a sport setting that weights up the steering, releases the shackles from the stability control system, and adds in a raughtier exhaust note. Plus, on the Abarth, you get Bilstein shock absorbers, stiffer springs and anti-roll bars, and uprated Brembo brakes. It could be argued that all of this rather goes against the character of this car, though. I mean, driving a 124 Spider never has been about tyre smoking heroics. Enjoy it for what it is, not for what it isn't. Keeping the roof down whenever you can, and that's no hardship, thanks to the fact that the cabin doesn't get too blustery, even on the highway. And when reality sets in or the sky clouds over, a simple pull of Mazda's beautifully designed fabric top provides very reasonable standards of refinement. The installation of a partial open-close system helps here, automatically raising or lowering the side windows by 6mm when the doors are opened or closed, thereby allowing for a tighter seal to the roof when you're driving at speed. It's another thing that'll help convince you that this could be a year-round driving companion, compromised only as much as it needs to be. Who cares if there are hot hatches that are quicker? You won't, not at the wheel of one of these. Reinventing any iconic design is always difficult. Get it right, as Fiat did with its new Era 500, and the rewards are massive. Get it wrong and the end result can look awkward and contrived. Well, we'll leave it to you to decide which of these two extremes is represented here. But we would point out that the Turin stylists have at least made every effort to give this car its own distinct identity. And that is not an easy thing to do, given that it's essentially a reskinned Mazda MX-5. Despite the fact that the suspension, the wheelbase dimensions and the underlying structure are all shared identically with that Japanese model, every single body panel on this new Era 124 Spider is unique in an attempt to rekindle the spirit of the 1966 original. That's something that's best appreciated here at the front, where the prominent, slightly recessed headlamps flank a trapezoidal front grille with a look that's very similar to that of the earlier car. The bonnet features a large classic Fiat badge, and its twin power domes represent another 60s reference, these having been added to the original model in order to house the more powerful engines that were introduced later in its production run. In some other respects, though, this second-generation design is resolutely modern, with technical touches like these LED driving lamps and new era safety standards confirmed by this broadly framed windscreen. It's from the side that you appreciate the extra length that Fiat has added to this design. It's 139mm longer than an MX-5. Now, that might not sound much, but in the metal, the change is enough to visually reposition this car, to the point where, at first glance, you might well see it less as a dinky, nippy little MX-5 rival and perhaps more as a competitor for something like a Mercedes SLC or a BMW Z4. Key visual tweaks include these prominent lower side skirts and the swallowtail rear haunches that directly reference the previous model. It's perhaps more significant, though, to note that the alterations made have spoiled the standard MX-5 design's perfect 50-50 weight distribution. The combination of extra length and the heavier turbocharged engine means that 55% of the bulk here sits over the nose. Moving around to the rear reveals another perspective in which the squat simplicity of the MX-5 has been replaced by finishing that's more ornate and elaborate, but not necessarily more effective. The bulky bumper and the oversized LED rear lights seem a little heavy-handed, just as they did on later versions of the old 124 Spider. Other touches work better, like these roll bar covers that on this Lusso model have a glistening premium silver finish, and this black diffuser-style panel below the bumper that houses the fog lights and these chromed dual exhaust pipes. Plus, as on an MX-5, there's this unusual bee-sting aerial sprouting from the wing. Time to take a seat inside. Now, after all the changes made to the panelwork and the engine bay, it's something of a shock to find the cockpit carried over from the MX-5's virtually unchanged. There's a Fiat badge on the steering wheel, revised door panels and softer touch plusher material on top of the dash. Otherwise, everything you see is exactly as it would be in the Mazda. Now, we can understand why purists might object to that, but then a purist is unlikely to be considering an Italian sports car built in Hiroshima anyway. Pragmatically speaking, there was really no need to change an interior that Mazda had spent years perfecting, offering as it does a driving position tailored to fit you like a glove. So does it all work? Well, broadly, yes, though folk over-familiar with the offerings of Colonel Sanders will find that the compact dimensions take a bit of getting used to as they adjust to the close proximity of the centre console, the door trim and the sides of the narrow footwell. You sit low on thin but still supportive seats that on this top Lusso Plus model feature compact Bose speakers integrated into the headrest so as to make listening to music with the top down a more enjoyable experience. True to sports car tradition, there's a stitched leather-trimmed short-throw gearshift lever with more premium leather on a grippy three-spoke steering wheel that looks and feels great, but sadly still only adjusts for height and not for reach. Through it, you view 3 satin chrome-ringed gauges, a large rev counter centrally positioned in pride of place. Just about anything else you need to know can be found here on the 7-inch infotainment display that comes as standard, providing you avoid entry-level trim. Positioned high on the centre of the dashboard in your natural line of sight, this colour monitor features a touchscreen and voice control, although it's much easier to simply operate the thing with the silver rotary controller that you'll find here, slightly awkwardly positioned behind the gear stick. Via this, you marshal the usual stereo, media and informational functions, as well as an optional navigation system. As for practical touches, well, you wouldn't normally expect many of these in a Roadster, particularly given this one. There are no door pockets and you don't even get a glove box. Actually, though, things aren't too bad in this regard, with a shallow storage compartment behind the conventional handbrake for phones and iPods. There's also a surprisingly deep lidded box between the seats that's lockable when the roof's down and sits just above these stylised cup holders you get on most models. When the roof's up, you'll also have quite a large stowage space in the area behind you where the folded fabric top would normally sit. We should also talk about the hood, another feature that was unnecessary for Fiat to redesign in creating this car. It isn't electrically operated and it doesn't need to be because the opening and closing process is so simple. You just reach behind you and pull up with one hand. And it's a process that only takes a few seconds and requires activation of a simple roof rail clip-on catch. When conditions allow you to retract the roof again, it stows neatly into a compact space in front of rollover hoops that are separated by a clip-on wind deflector. One thing the roof doesn't do is compromise your boot space, which is just as well, since, as with any Roadster, there really isn't very much of it. The extra length of this Fiat has freed up 10 litres more trunk room than you get in an MX-5, so that's 140 litres in total, but that's not going to make very much difference to the limited amount you can carry. If that is a problem, then go and buy a hot hatch. Due to the multi-link rear suspension, the sides of this little cargo bay are rather oddly shaped, but it's quite deep as there's no spare wheel to take up room. If you do need to carry more, then Fiat offers an optional luggage rack that attaches to the top of the boot lid, onto which you can strap on extra bags. Pricing for the 124 Spider is pretty straightforward. Think in terms of needing a £20,000 budget for the base 1.4 litre MultiAir turbo 140 bhp model, or around £30,000 for their 170 bhp Abarth variant. Automatic transmission is a fairly pricey option at nearly £2,000, which is a good excuse to stay with the preferable 6-speed manual stick shift. It's the standard 140 bhp 124 Spider model that's our focus in this case, and here there are 3 trim options. Most will want to try and find the extra £2,750 that's necessary to progress beyond base Classica spec and get themselves into a mid-range Lusso version. For a further £1,000 on top of that, you can get yourself into this top Lusso Plus variant. Onto the value proposition those figures represent. Now, at this point, the obvious benchmark comparison has to be with the Mazda MX-5 model this Fiat's based on. So some of the magazines point out that this 124 Spider costs more than its Japanese counterpart, but that's not quite giving you the whole story. Yes, it is possible to get an MX-5 for £1,000 less than Fiat asks here, but that sum only gets you the Mazda with its base 1.5 litre 131 PS engine. For a direct performance comparison with this Fiat, you really need to look at the MX-5 in its pokier 2 litre 160 PS form. And in that, guys, the Mazda will cost you over £21,000, so around £1,500 more than a 124 Spider. Ultimately, though, the decision between these two cars isn't really about money. It's more about the kind of driving experience you prefer. The normally aspirated punch of the MX-5 or the lazier, torquier, more relaxed power delivery of this turbocharged Fiat. So are there other comparable choices you can make? Well, not really. Sporty versions of cars like the Mini Convertible or the DS3 Cabrio are really hatchback drop tops rather than proper sports cars. Something like an Audi TT Roadster or a BMW Z4 is closer to the mark, but you'll need at least around £30,000 for either of those, and neither model is really the kind of back-to-basics sports car that Fiat's offering here. The Lotus Elise is, but one of those would be too crude to drive every day, and anyway, it's priced from around £35,000. Obviously, if you're among those ready to spend around £30,000 on the top Abarth version of this car, then the TT, the Z4 and the Elise will all make more sense as credible alternatives. But even in that case, there's something about a 124 that remains pretty unique. So, if having weighed up the opposition, you decide that it is this Fiat that you really want, you want to know just how generous the Italian brand's been with the standard spec. So, let's see. Base Classica trim gives you 16-inch alloy wheels, LED lights and powered body-coloured mirrors. Move inside and you'll find leather covering the steering wheel and the gear knob, plus there's an engine start button, cruise control with a speed limiter, air conditioning, USB port and auxiliary input sockets, Bluetooth phone connectivity and a 3-inch infotainment display from which you can activate the rather basic AM/FM radio. So in other words, you won't really feel like you've spoiled yourself. Much better is mid-range Lusso trim, in which form your 124 Spider will make more of a driveway statement with its larger 17-inch alloys, chrome exhaust tips and a premium silver finish for the roll bar covers and the windscreen surround. At this level you also get heated leather seats, keyless entry, front fog lights, rear parking sensors and a reversing camera that displays on a larger 7-inch infotainment display that also gives you a DAB radio, Wi-Fi connectivity and a navigation system with 3D mapping. Now that little lot doesn't leave much for Fiat to add to this top Lusso Plus variant. Just an adaptive front lighting system that turns with the bends, headlamps and daytime running lights that use dual-like LEDs and a 9-speaker Bose audio system. The Bose setup includes 2 speakers built into each headrest, so you'll be able to hear your favourite tunes clearly, even when you're driving with the roof down at higher speeds. Should you prefer the faster charms of the Abarth 124 Spider, then you'll find its exterior has quite a different look. Enthusiasts will note the pokier 170 bhp model's 4 exhaust pipes, only 2 on this less powerful model, along with its more extreme styling. And Abarth customers get specific styling for the front grille mesh and the fog light surrounds, plus black painted side skirts, a rear diffuser and a unique boot spoiler. Another distinguishing Abarth feature is the Forgiato grey finish for the screen frame and the rollover hoops, while 17-inch Corsa alloy wheels complete that top variant's exterior look. Under the skin, Abarth engineering delivers Bilstein shock absorbers, stiffer springs and anti-roll bars, extra chassis bracing, a limited slip differential and Brembo brakes. The Abarth model has a unique cabin too, with uniquely patterned leather seats, Alcantara suede trim for the handbrake gaiter and the console section above the ventilation controls, an Abarth steering wheel and a red-faced rev counter. Plus there's a sport mode that you engage via a toggle switch behind the gear lever that sharpens up the throttle and the steering, releases the stability control system shackles and allows more noise from the exhaust. Those more concerned with sounds from the stereo will want to know that the Abarth model comes with Aha by Harman and Stitcher internet radio apps that will allow them to play music from their smartphones and also to access Facebook and Twitter. So that's covered standard equipment across the range. What about options for the 124 Spider? Well, if you don't want the standard ice white pastel paint colour, you're going to need to pay extra, either for metallic paint, the urban white tricoat paint, or this Passione red pastel finish. If you want to give your car a more classic look that's closer to the original Roadster that inspired this one, you could choose the 17-inch historical alloy wheel with its distinctive 4-spoke design. A further finishing touch might be the optional black pack that covers the windscreen frame, the roll bar covers and the door mirrors with a special dark polished plastic. To add some practicality, Fiat also offers a rear luggage rack that fixes to the boot lid so you can strap on a suitcase in true Roadster fashion. On the inside, options are limited to adding the 7-inch infotainment screen to the entry point Classica model, but if you choose to do this, then it doesn't come with the satellite navigation that's included with the 2 higher trimmed versions. Pick one of those 2 higher spec 124s and you have the option of black leather seats with silver stitching or tobacco coloured hide. Go for the Abarth model and you can add in navigation and the 9-speaker Bose sound system, and there's also a more extrovert red and black leather upholstery option. On the outside of the Abarth, you could change from the default San Marino 1972 black paint to red, white, blue or grey shades. These 4 optional colours can also be applied to the door mirrors, the front lower spoiler and the towing eye cover. Lastly, a visibility pack offers rear parking sensors and rain sensing wipers, plus LED headlights with automatic dusk sensing, self-leveling and washers, along with the adaptive front light system that we mentioned earlier. Right, that's the optional features covered. What about safety? Now, Fiat hasn't included any of the most sophisticated radar-controlled electronic safety features currently offered elsewhere in the market, but all the basics appear to have been covered here. As standard, every 124 Spider comes with ESC, electronic stability control, and an active pedestrian protection system that automatically lifts the bonnet to help cushion any impact if someone steps in front of the car. Rollover bars aim to keep this Fiat's occupants from harm if the car flips over, while twin front and side airbags will activate in a collision. The front passenger airbag can be deactivated, so you can use the Isofix child seat mount. There's also a tyre pressure monitoring system, and should you be unlucky enough to suffer a puncture, then a fix-and-go repair kit's provided to pump up the offending wheel with sealant to get you home. You'd expect a small, light sports car with a curb weight of just over a tonne to be a fairly frugal thing to run, and that's pretty much how it turns out here. The industry always tells us these days that turbocharging offers a more efficient approach, so we were keen to see whether the 1.4 litre MultiAir turbo with this Fiat would prove to be more frugal than the 1.5 and 2 litre normally aspirated Skyactiv engines used in the rival Mazda MX-5. In the event, the results are somewhat inconclusive, given that the MultiAir unit's 44.1 mpg combined cycle showing makes this Fiat either 3 mpg thirstier or 3 mpg more frugal than the MX-5. It's all down to which Mazda engine you compare it to. As for the more powerful 170 bhp Abarth model, well, in that form, the 124 manages 33.2 mpg if you change gear yourself, or 31 mpg with the auto box. If you're still making Mazda MX-5 comparisons when it comes to CO2 emissions, well, you'll find that the story is similar to that recorded on fuel. A 1.5 litre MX-5 records 139 grams per kilometre, while a 2 litre MX-5 is up at 161 grams per kilometre. In contrast, the 124 Spider manages 148 grams per kilometre, which means that a year's road tax will set you back £145, which is £15 more than a 1.5 litre MX-5, but £35 less than the Mazda in its 2 litre form. The Pokia 170 bhp Abarth variant manages to record 148 grams per kilometre too, or at least in manual form. If you equip that Abarth with an auto gearbox, the CO2 figure rises to 153 grams per kilometre. It's interesting to note that, unlike Mazda, Fiat thinks it's necessary to equip this car with an engine start-stop system. And bear in mind that your range is going to be limited by the relatively small size of the 45 litre fuel tank. What else might you need to know? Well, servicing will be needed every 9,000 miles or 12 months, whichever comes around sooner. So you can budget ahead for this. Fiat offers fixed price service plans for the Spider that take care of all service charges, labour and replacement fluids. You can pick from durations that span from 1 to 5 years, with corresponding mileages from 9,000 to 45,000 miles. Arranging a trip to the garage is easy with Fiat's My Car Service system. That's there to create an online interactive handbook for your car. It's part of the Uconnect Live infotainment setup, and it lets you set up reminders to book maintenance visits using a smartphone. When it comes to calculating the overall cost of owning and running a Fiat 124 Spider, the key figure to take into account is, as usual, the likely residual value. The inherent desirability of this Italian roadster should allow, say, a base Classica variant to hang on to around 45% of its new price after the usual 3-year, 30,000-mile period. That figure should rise closer to 50% if you opt for the more popular and sought-after Lusso or Abarth models. It's all enough to put this roadster on a par with its Mazda MX-5 rival, and on a similar level to other sleek sports convertibles like Audi's TT Roadster. Insurance rates for the Spider are very similar to those of an MX-5, starting at Group 25E for the Classica model, while the two Lusso versions fall into Group 26E. In other words, there's no great penalty for choosing a better equipped 124. Park an Abarth variant on your drive though, and you'll pay for cover based on a Group 29E ranking. Finally, we'll tell you that, like all Fiats, this one gets a 3-year unlimited mileage warranty. That's better than the 3-year 60,000 mile cover that Mazda offers, and it's extendable at extra cost too, should you feel the need. There's also a 1-year breakdown package, 8 years of anti-corrosion cover, and a 36-month guarantee against paintwork faults. It's easy to be critical when it comes to platform sharing, but it's an approach that's always been hard to get away from. The original 124 Spider was based on a humble 124 saloon, just as the Mark I model MX-5 borrowed plenty from a Mazda 323 hatch. So why shouldn't this modern-era Fiat sports car share its fundamentals with a more credible donor model, its Japanese arch-rival? After all, if the Touring brand had developed this car from scratch, we would all have compared every nut and bolt of it to an MX-5 anyway. In the event, we've actually been surprised at just how different this 124 actually is. To be frank, we find the retro flourishes a little heavy-handed. You may disagree. In any case, though, that's not what fundamentally differentiates this car from an MX-5. For that, you have to look beneath the bonnet. Torquey turbo power makes this a more relaxed, more mature thing to drive than the frantic, normally aspirated Mazda. Of course, you may not want that in an affordable sports roadster, in which case, you know what to do. There's room in this segment, though, for something different, and it's refreshing to be able to report that this Fiat provides it. Yes, it would have been nice if the Italians had given this model its own unique interior, but there's not a lot wrong with the Mazda-derived cabin we have been given. For us, more of an issue is the slightly unsettled ride and the fact that mainstream models don't get the limited slip differential that so improves the handling of the only slightly pricier 2-litre MX-5. These are easily fixable issues, though, and they certainly won't stop this car selling in the numbers Fiat wants to hit in the US market. As for this side of the pond, well, if in your past there does happen to be a convertible Fiat, Alfa or Lancia you remember fondly, well, this 124 Spider will be exactly what you've been waiting for. And even if there isn't, it's a model with undeniable charm. Ultimately, every love story has its own soundtrack. If this is yours, then we think you'll like this car very much.